Want to hear my pet peeve?
You know I love nothing better.
Somebody says, hey, I'd love for you to look at my positioning statement. As if, first of all, it's pet peeve for a number of reasons. As if me agreeing with your positioning statement is consequential at all. I'm not your client. I'm not going to write you a check.
Yes.
But more so, and this is what I get into today, as if positioning is merely some wordsmithing exercise. If we just write, and I think this is frankly the fault of many of the positioning gurus. People aren't getting this from nowhere. They're getting this from somewhere. This idea of having a positioning statement in like a, in a go-to market document or whatever. I'm not saying there's no value in that, but the problem is when people think that's the extent of the exercise. It's almost like, if the extent of having a mission statement was to write a mission statement, like that was the purpose of the exercise,
yeah,
which it frankly is in a lot of cases, erroneously, then what have you done? You spent all this energy writing a mission statement that has no practical impact on the organization. What's the point? Positioning is the same. If you think about it merely as an exercise in writing a statement, and then that's it, and you've got it somewhere gathering dust on a Google Drive, right? But it doesn't permeate everything about how you communicate, what you sell, what you offer, how you speak, what you talk about, how you deliver, how you serve, and then some. Futile exercise.
Yeah, and I almost feel like a lot of it, especially people who, are new to having to sell themselves, it kind of comes from Mad Men, right? Like the notion of we just need to come up with the 5 words in a row that are going to capture attention without recognizing everything that came before that, right? Like an organization can write a good ad when it understands the customer, when it understands how the product fills a need, when it understands all of those things. But we tend to just focus on the endpoint, the sexy part, right? Like the exciting, let's get together and put our fancy words together part. And honestly, if you can do it the other way, where you get so clear on everything up to that point, and the words you put together are maybe kind of mediocre, you're still going to be infinitely better place than just treating it as a wordsmithing exercise.
So the Mad Men example is a great example. I'm glad you went there, right? Because on TV, what do you see? You see Don Draper and his team of copywriters who are just brilliant at coming up with the right words. But what you don't see on TV, you see some of it on TV, but it's certainly not the focal point of the show, is what drives that creative exercise. In a marketing, advertising, agency context, you have two functions, two departments there's more, but there's 2 critical functions. You have a creative department and you have a research department.
Mm-hmm.
The research department's job is understand the audience, understand the product, understand the world of the people that we're trying to influence and persuade, understand what their other options are, understand what they're trying to achieve, understand what their deepest, darkest pains and frustrations are, so on and so forth, and then feed that information to the creative department to come up with the words.
Mm-hmm.
And if that information does not exist or is flawed in some way, creative can come up with words, but do the words land? Do they stick? Do they resonate? Very risky.
Yeah.
Now, what I want to do today is hopefully elevate people's expectations of the positioning exercise from merely a wordsmithing exercise, writing a positioning statement that maybe lands on your LinkedIn profile. And yes, that's part of it, absolutely. To a much more deep, strategic, nuanced exercise. And the way I'd articulate this to kick us off here is you want to go from merely coming up with the words to truly entering the mind of your prospect. And we talked a little bit about, well, a lot about empathy in the previous episode, right? This is about truly starting to empathize with your prospect, their pain, their situation, their circumstances, how they see the world, how they see the options in front of them, what they're trying to achieve, what success, like all of this stuff. This is the goal of positioning, is to meet them where they're at. Now, will that yield a strong positioning statement and a good LinkedIn profile and the right copy on your website? Absolutely. Only if we have truly stepped into the world and the mind and the worldview of our prospect will the words come together appropriately and effectively.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about what this cognitive framing even means, right? What does it mean to be able to step into the mind of somebody else? In this case, we're talking about the prospect, but this is true of any kind of conversation, right? We've all had those discussions where you're face to face with somebody, unfortunately, often maybe on a keyboard against somebody, having this back and forth. And you're saying your thing, and you're saying your thing over and over again, and you think you're articulating it really well. And then you realize at some point, this happens at, family dinner with Uncle Joe, you realize at some point that there's nothing that's penetrating. It does not matter what you say. Nothing is landing. And if you're really honest with yourself, same thing's happening in the other direction, right? Everything they're saying to you
No,
is
that's
hitting...
not true. That doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
fair.
That
Everything they're saying to you is hitting the brick wall of your own cognitive frame.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really frustrating experience, right? When you're trying to get someone to understand something or see something, but it's like nothing's getting through. So this idea of cognitive framing is very important. The idea that each and every one of us has a cognitive frame. That is that, like, we have a box around how we think, to use a very simple, like, lay explanation. That box determines what information gets in and what information stays out.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And this is where cognitive frames can be quite powerful, positively and negatively. This is why it's really hard to change somebody's mind, because once they're well entrenched in a belief, what happens is they will only pay attention to information and data that supports that belief.
Yeah.
And that's what gets into the frame. And they will ignore or reinterpret or rationalize away any information at odds with that belief. So a really relatable example of this is politics. Okay. Get a Democrat and a Republican on a panel together, a card-carrying Democrat, card-carrying Republican. And are they actually talking to each other? No. No, they're both saying things, and they are bouncing off of each other's respective cognitive frames. Like, no one's actually letting anything in. They're just talking at each other, and then ideas are bouncing around off of the frames. I always find it kind of comical, and this is not to get political. I think we can all hopefully acknowledge this regardless of your politics, that, you can turn on CNN. And I find American politics is more extreme in this regard than Canadian politics. This is why I find it comical sitting here in Canada, right? You can turn on CNN and you can turn on Fox, right? And I'll do this every time I'm in the States in a hotel. I'll turn them both on and something happened, right? And they will have radically different interpretations of the same event. And you ask yourself, well, okay, it's the same thing happened, but they're not like slight interpretation. They're radically different. Well, how is that possible? Because, well, I mean, for starters, each of their audiences has a very different cognitive frame, a set of beliefs and values, and they are speaking to the frame of their audience. And therefore, they have a completely different perspective. And the reason we're going here, obviously, is I want you, the listener, to start to appreciate that you have a cognitive frame and your prospect has a cognitive frame. And so, and they're different because you've had different experiences. You have different, as we talked about earlier, the previous episode, you have different knowledge. You have expertise that they don't have. They've likely more recently been steeped in the pain of having the problem that they're facing more than you have, because you're not steeped in the pain. You're on the solution side. They're on the problem side. And so you have completely different frames and ways of seeing the world and ways of seeing the problem, ways of seeing the solution. And if you can't enter their frame, like that's the real strategic problem, is entering their frame, understanding their frame, and therefore being able to speak to it and having your words enter their box, so to speak, right? And if the exercise in your mind is merely, let's write a positioning statement, well, that does nothing to enter the cognitive frame of the prospect, which is where the battle's won.
And I think that most people spend far too much of their time trying to drag other people into their cognitive frame than they do trying to step into the other person's cognitive frame. And this is true. I mean, we talk about politics because it's the very obvious example. But if you're paying attention to this, you'll see it everywhere. And you'll see it in places that are, important, and you'll see it in places that are not. The reality is that we all have this, but we all want to yank everyone over into our framing. We want to sort of win that battle. And, that might feel like a noble path to take, but it's not going to be the path that allows you to really speak to the people that you want to work with.
I mean, it's a really subtle but very consequential point you're making, because it's tempting to, in the context of marketing and positioning, it's tempting to just try to convince people of things, right? Well, okay, let me come up with arguments, right? Let me come up with data. Let me prove to them why they're wrong and that I'm right. And you wouldn't say it that way, but that's kind of the approach, as opposed to attempting to understand how they came to the conclusions they came to, acknowledging the validity in those conclusions given the information that they had, and then from that place of empathy, showing them and demonstrating to them a different way of looking at things, or an alternative viewpoint, right? And you call this communication. Like that's fundamentally what, effective communication looks like. And yet many consultants, I think to your point, are too busy trying to convince people of things and pull them into your frame, despite the fact that it rarely works.
Yeah. Well, and let's also recognize that if they had your frame, like if they lived with you inside that frame, they wouldn't need to work with you, right? They would have all of the same understanding and experience and opinions that you have. What you're bringing to the table is valuable because it's different. But, and so recognizing that their frame is also valuable, right? Their frame is the most important thing that you can understand. Because if you can walk into it with them, if you can, step in, look around, understand what's going on, have a good conversation with them, then you have the opportunity to, bring all of your knowledge and experience and expertise to bear. But until you can do that, that's not ever going to be the case.
And this is so important. Like I almost don't want to minimize this by attributing it or categorizing it rather within the positioning exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, this idea of entering your prospect's cognitive frame, understanding their frame, is the key to unlocking positioning. And maybe just a word on that for a moment. There's really 3 layers of positioning. Most people focus on let's call it the top layer. That is what you see, the words you put on your LinkedIn profile, the words that go on your LinkedIn content, your website. There's the words. Underneath the words, the middle layer is the actual message. This is where like your positioning statement on your Google Doc that you worked on that articulates the message or the strategy. That's important. It drives the customer facing manifestations of your positioning. But the bottom layer is your understanding of the prospect's frame, how they see the world. And the more deep, colorful, and nuanced that understanding is, the more effective everything above it becomes. And I don't want to minimize that to merely a positioning exercise, because the truth is, the more that you understand your prospect's frame and how they see the world and how they've come to the beliefs that they've come to, the better your business is going to be, the better your delivery is going to be, the more effective you're going to be at serving your clients and helping them get better results and truly partnering with them in getting those results. I mean, I would say we are um, obsessed, really, for lack of a better term, about understanding the inner world of our client, not merely for the purposes of positioning and selling to them, but I'd argue even more materially and significantly for the purposes of helping them get the results they want to get.